So let's start over again. Welcome to Street Gangs. It was they're going pretty well. I don't know what happened to the video, but we're going to go ahead and start again. Um, Street Gangs. Today we're going to be talking about street gangs, and not the computer, but your textbook says that the most dangerous issues or the most common prevalent issues within America today are street gangs and drugs. Okay. Back in the 50s and 60s, less than half of the states of the country had street gangs. Today, every single state has gangs. Every single state has an issue with gangs. Has an issue with street gangs. And they just continue. So, what is a street gang? A gang is defined as a group of people who gather together with the common purposes, common goals. The difference between a gang and a street gang is the violent and criminal activity that they engage in. Okay, so your textbook says the gang label has been applied to various groups from Spanky and Our Gang of the Little Rascals of the 1920s to the leather-clad, violent, drug-using outlaw motorcycle gangs of the 50s and 60s. The last quarter of this 20th century saw significant growth in gang problems across the country. In the 70s, as I said, I said the 50s and 60s, but the textbook says that in the 70s, less than half of the states reported a youth gang problem. By the 1990s, by the time I finished high school in the 1980s, every state and the District of Columbia had a gang problem and gang issues. The percentage of law enforcement agencies that report gang problems in 2009 was 17%. In the rural countries, 32%. In the urban and smaller cities, and 51% in the suburban counties, and 86% in the larger cities. 86% of the larger cities in this country state that they have a gang problem, a youthful gang problem. Okay, so over the last few weeks, we've had a few discussions. One of those discussions was, should parents be held responsible for the actions of their children? And last week we said, should youthful offenders be treated like adults? You know, when 86% of our cities have a gang problem, we do have an issue in our. Let me get this out of my way. And generally, the gang leaders, the leadership of the gangs, make money. They bear the fruits of the activities as they go on. So gangs are also known to wear their colors. Outlaw motorcycle clubs wear their cuts, and on the back, they've got the city or state that they're from. They've got their emblem, and then they've got their name across the top on the rockers. Gangs are responsible for 48% of the violent crime in most jurisdictions, and as much as 90% in other districts, according to the NGIC, the National Gang Information Center. A lot of gang members continue to engage in gang activity while incarcerated. And this is where we get into the prison gangs, and that's a different lecture altogether. A lot of the gangs will adopt certain types of hairstyles. They will communicate through the use of hand signs, using some form of sign language. And I did this in my last. The sign languages of the Bloods. Um, the primary indicator that you've got a gang problem in your area is graffiti. They're going to start spraying and marking their territory. When I worked for probation, we had a graffiti squad, and whenever a gang tagged the building or they put graffiti on the walls, we would send our uh, graffiti squad out to paint it in white. The graffiti squad were sex offenders and violent offenders who were not allowed to go to the regular nonprofit organizations to work their community service. A lot of gangs today, especially the youthful gangs, break the law to provide funding for gang activities to further the gang's reputation in the streets. Okay, so why do people join gangs? Sociologists and your textbook suggest there are a lot of reasons why people join gangs. They have totaled the following reasons, or they've compiled the following reasons for joining a gang: identity, okay, youthful members. Some people feel like they don't belong; they're invisible. They don't have an identity of their own, so they'll join the gang, and the gang will give them an identity. It'll give them a brotherhood, a sisterhood to be a part of. Discipline. A lot of times, and with the growth and the formation of the street gang, was when I was coming up and when I was growing up, because we were latchkey kids. We were left to our own devices. We were left to do our own thing. We were not really disciplined. We were allowed to, for the most part, not everyone. So I guess this is time for my size 9 shoe lecture, where I'm not talking about everybody. I'm talking in generalities. So if you wear a size 9 shoe, it applies to you. Okay. Because they want recognition. Okay. They want to be part of the biggest, baddest group in the world. Kind of like the Marines, Marines are an identity, but so is being a Hell's Angel or a Bandito, or Mata Salvatrucha or a Blood or a Crypt. These gangs give identity. They give recognition. They'll give love. Even though this is a negative form of love, they show actual care and concern, and they'll protect you. They've got your back. They make you feel like you belong to something bigger than yourself. Money is always an issue, and it is always a draw. If you're single mom, and we find that a lot of gang members are latchkey kids. Either both parents are out of the house, they're not there, or they're being raised by a single mom who's working 2 or 3 jobs just to keep the power bill on. And then you see Uncle Jimmy over here slinging dope, running prostitutes, or doing whatever criminal activity he's doing, and he's always got money. He's got a brand new car. He's got bling all over his hands and around his neck, and he's got money. So this is a lure. Why would I want to be part of the humdrum society if I could go out and commit criminality and be wealthy and have money and have all the things that we need? Additionally, especially in the bigger cities, kids are intimidated into the gangs to avoid harassment, to avoid getting beat up. Gangs provide their members and their family members with protection from other gangs, as well as other perceived threats. So becoming a member of the gang, becoming a member of the neighborhood gang, is about keeping yourself safe. Okay, feelings of fear and hatred and bigotry and poverty and disenfranchisement all create a draw to join the street gang. The general breakdown of society and social values are also considered motivations for joining a street gang. Okay. So the 3 R's of gang culture is reputation, respect, and retaliation or revenge. You can't allow any. Well, so let's start with reputation. Okay, reputation is built upon the work that you do. Okay, the critical concern to gangbangers is their reputation. Okay, you get greater reputation. You know, it extends not only to each of the individuals of the gang, but to the gang itself. If the work and the activities and the criminal activities um, that a gang commits or uses, or they do, you know, we find it as a whole um, different. You know, it increases the respect. It increases, you know, when you see the banditos driving down the street, does it give you a twinge of fear? When you see the Hells Angels driving down the interstate, does it give you a twinge of fear? Or the Cossacks, or you know, the pagans? You know, the four major motorcycle outlaw gangs in this country are the Hells Angels, the Banditos, the pagans, and the Banditos, the Hells Angels, the pagans, and the Cossacks. Okay, they have a reputation. Just when you see their cuts, you see their clothing, you see their identities. You know, you automatically go, "Oh my goodness, it's the Banditos." Okay, the prison gangs are the same. The gang banging in the prison. Okay, you're going to get a whole lot more respect if you're a gangbanger and you go attack somebody uh, who is worthy, who is formidable. Um, you know, I had a man, and I shared this already. I had a guy threaten to kill me in the prison the other day. Well, it's been 3 weeks now, maybe a month already. But with that, you know, thinking that that would help his respect, but what it did was it actually hurt his respect because of who he was threatening and who he was. Um, Wasp on my hat. Okay. Because of who he was attacking, me being the chaplain, he lost respect among his group and his peers, even though he thought that maybe it would increase his juice by coming up against the facility chaplain. Okay. While being juiced is very important, or having a strong reputation is important. The manner in which you achieve this is also important. You're not going to get the same level of juice if you're robbing a little blue hair old lady of her social security check as you would attacking a member of a rival gang, or committing an armed robbery, you know, robbing a convenience store, or you know, things to that nature. Uh, if you uh, Upon interviews, many of the gang members will embellish their gang activities as an attempt to uh, impugn their conversational partner, or to impress their conversational partner. They're going to talk about the great things that they've done, and they'll exaggerate a little bit. So this makes self-report studies a little hard to do because you don't know if they're embellishing their history or if they're actually telling the truth. Okay, gang members uh, freely admit their crimes, and of any experiences uh, that you know establish their credibility. Okay, you know let me change seats because I can't see over there. Can't see where I'm going. Yeah, they want to become members. They want to be jumped in. You're as a male to become a member of the street gang. You need to be jumped into the gang. and they'll beat you down like Maras Abatuche and the Sureños. You have to take a beating for 13 seconds, and you can't just sit there and take it. You have to fight back. You're going to lose because there's nobody. I don't know, Chuck Norris. If this isn't the movies where you can take on 5, 6, 7 people and beat them all. You might take one or two, but you're not Jack Reacher. But being beaten down until the leader calls for an end is how you get in. Other gang members, they require you to felony in, felony out. Well, there is no out, but you have to commit a felony to join the gang. And this way, the gang has blackmail or extortion or embezzlement over your head. Okay. But these actions are tent to bond the members of the gang together as a family because they all have this same shared experiences and they all go about doing the same things. Frequently, young gang members, whether hardcore or associate, will talk of fellowship and the feeling of sharing and belonging that they have, even though they had to get beaten up to become a member of the crew, a member of the group. Next is respect. And I find this interesting working in the prison because every inmate demands respect. It's something they rarely give, but they demand it from everyone. And they want, and some gang members carry their desire to the extreme. Respect is sought for not only for the individual, but for the gang, okay? Family, territory, various other things, real or perceived in the mind of the gangbanger. Okay, so we've got this inmate in my prison. His last name is Fisher, and when he showed up, and when I showed up and I saw him there, he's a G4, which is the maximum security custody level that we have on my prison. There's only one higher, and that's G5. And then there's ADSEG, but he's a G4. And I said, hey, you need to stop messing up, because we share a name. And when you violate the rules and you break the rules, you're not impressing the gang that you're in. You're diminishing the name Fisher, and you need to stop. And then I got to meet his mom and his girlfriend, wife, whatever she was. And we found the same, the same discussion went on. This is a Fisher thing. You don't disrespect the family name. Even though we're not family, we still share the same name. And this is the respect issues that are expected. Okay, so it must be understood that within the gang culture, no challenge, no disrespect can go unchallenged. Okay, a lot of times, drive-by shootings and other acts of violence follow an event of perceived disrespect. Okay, so the common occurrences is a confrontation between a gang set and a single rival gang member. Okay, so these 4 or 5 guys, they're at the mall, they're running, and George is a member of a rival set, and George, they attack George, they beat down George, they do whatever. George runs off, and he goes and gets his friends. All of his friends come back, and they seek revenge in order to restore the reputation that had been diminished earlier in the day. This can occur immediately. It can follow a delay for planning and obtaining the necessary equipment. This could be an immediate response, or it can be something that they wait a few days for before they go about doing this. It must be also understood that many of these acts of violence are the results of bad drug deals, or infringement on drug territory, or infringement on prostitution, or infringement on guns, or smuggling, or whatever criminal activity the gang is doing. If they see another gang moving in on their territory, moving into their business, they're going to have to respond. It's required. Uh, there's some question the authenticity of gang rivalries in shootings and other acts of violence. Um, if the gang aspect is uh, learned about uh, the crimes, a lot of crimes can be solved through the use of accurate intelligence and intelligence gathering techniques by law enforcement. Okay, and a lot of this is overcome through community oriented policing, because if you're in the community, if you're out of your car and you're talking to people, these guys are more likely to talk to you. They're more likely to give you time. Okay, and gangbanger and gang in the gangbanger world, it's said that today's witness is tomorrow's suspect, is the next day's victim. Okay, so first you're going to see the offense happen to a friend of yours, so you're going to respond, and you're going to go attack the people that attacked your friends, and then the next day or the next, you're going to be the target of that violence, because and this is a never-ending cycle of retaliation. So the basis of all gangs, okay, there's the Chicago-based gangs, and your textbook talks about the California gangs, uh, the Chicago-based gangs, and then the East Coast gangs. Okay, so you've got the basis for all gangs. You've got the East Coast Hispanic alliances, Chicago gangs, and the California gangs. And then you've got your motorcycle clubs, your outlaw motorcycle clubs, your hate groups, your religious cults, and then other groups. Okay, so the Chicago-based gangs, the Chicago street gangs, engaged the Chicago street gangs emerged in the 1960s when a youth group called the Black Keystone Rangers developed into a criminal organization. Its leader, Jeff Fort, united the leaders of some 50 area street gangs into a single organization, calling them the Black Keystone Nation. You may be familiar with it. If you're not, you need to go watch this movie. It's called The Warriors. And it's about this group, this gang of the Warriors who go to Jeff Fort's rally where he's trying to unite all the Chicago gangs under one banner. And then they get targeted by all these bands and they have to fight their way home. It was rather interesting. It's a pretty decent movie. The group is called the Main 21. The Black Keystone Nation was led by Jeff Fort and his gang of 21. Okay, these leaders projected the group as social conscious, self-help organizations that would uplift themselves and their community. As a result of this premise, the group sought and obtained grant money, $1.4 million in the war against poverty, to try and help the inner city streets of Chicago. These funds were then used to support the illegal activities of gun smuggling and drug manufacturing, prostitution. The grand jury uncovered the mismanagement, and Jeff Fort was sent to federal prison. And there's a picture of Mr. Jeff Fort. The Black Keystone Rangers, of the perceived success of the Keystone Nation, resulted in the formulation of other street gangs that claimed to be politically and socially motivated. Okay, of the groups that surfaced to the level of many dropped to the level of disorganization, while others developed to sophisticated, highly organized groups involving prostitution, robbery, burglary, extortion, drugs. The very influential opponent of the Black P. Stone is the Black Gangster Disciples, or the Black Disciples, led by David Barksdale and Larry Hoover. The Black Gangster Disciple Nation was raised as a adversary of the P. Stone Nation. Okay. Throughout the 70s, the P. Stone Nation and the Black Gangster Disciple Nation controlled Chicago's drug trade, and they became bitter rivals, expressing anger by creating the bloodiest gang war in Chicago history, even beyond the mafia of the 1930s. The war between the Black Gangster Disciples and the P. Stone Rangers almost killed a generation of men. Okay, so many of the leaders of the members of the Chicago gangs ended up in federal correctional facilities. They ended up in prison. Okay. The increased number of individual gangs created a need for visual gang identification that would enable members to distinguish allies from enemies. And this created two separate alliances. But during the 80s, within the prison walls, gang began separating into alliances. These two alliances were the People Nation and the Folk Nation. All the gangs that were originally aligned with the P. Stone Nation aligned with the People Nation. All those who were with the Black Gangster Disciples aligned with the Folk Nation. Okay, a lot of the gangster sets were aligned with one of these two Chicago alliances. You know, the entire country is aligned with either the People Nation or the Folk Nation. So the People Nation, some of the sets, some of the gangs that are found within the People Nation are the Almighty Saints, the Gaylords, the Bishops, the P. Stone, the Insane Unknowns, the Latin Angels, Pachuca's Brothers, Counts, the Latin Mob, the Latin Stones, the Bloods, the Latin Kings, the United Blood Nation, okay, the Vice Lords. You know, these are some of the most well-known street gangs in the world, and they run under the five. So, you know, some of their signals is, you know, the ASL, I love you, backwards, by the way, a five-pointed crown, the five-pointed star, the five-pointed star and crescent moon, linked to the Nation of Islam and some of the other Muslim groups. The Folk Nation runs under the six. You know, the Star of David is mentioned, is used within the Folk Nation. You know, the six, you know, the six-sided face of the dice, the number six, and I find it interesting. The swastika is also within the six, and you find this primarily with the Aryan Brotherhood. One of the founders of the Brotherhood was a man named Bingham, and he has a swastika on his right arm and a Star of David on his left arm because he's Jewish. You know, and I just find that interesting. But the Disciples of Darkness, the Spanish Gangster Disciples, the Gangster Bitches, the Gangster Disciples, the Black Disciples, La Raza, the Insane Popes, the Gangster 2-6, and the list just goes on and on and on. The International Posse, the Sin City Boys, the Insane Familia, kind of this insane folks, because they're part of the set, and all of the insane gangs, the Almighty Folks, the Maniac Family, and you know, they just go on and on. So even, you know, the Crips are part of the Folk Nation. Okay, the Los Angeles-based gangs are the Bloods and the Crips, although they are aligned with the national alliances of either the people or the folk. The Bloods and the Crips also came about in the 1960s. They're probably the most widely recognized gangs, because of the media exposure that they received in the 1980s. In the 1980s, records show that there were 5 funerals a day of gang members that are killing each other. They've migrated, the Bloods and the Crips have gone across the country. There are literally hundreds of sets all across and all around the country. Whereas in the 80s, 70s, and 80s, well, the Bloods and the Crips, 60s, 70s, and 80s, the Bloods and the Crips were racially specific. They were African American. Now there is no racial specificity in the gang. Okay, the Crips, 1969, a man by the name of Raymond Washington. He was 15 years old at the time, organized a group of other neighborhood youths, and they called themselves the Baby Avenues. And the Baby Avenues wanted to emulate the Black Panthers of the 1960s. So that's what they wanted to do. The Crips got involved in community organizing. They were eventually grew up and became the Avenue Boys. And since they claimed their turf in Central Avenue in East Los Angeles, Raymond Washington, along with his best friend Stanley Tookie Williams, and several other gang members from the Avenues, were fascinated by the hype of the Black Panthers, and they want to develop the Avenues into a larger force. Baby Avenues began using the name Avenue Cribs since members lived on the avenues, Central Avenue. Crib members would wear blue scarves around their necks and their heads. The blue color became their representative. Snoopy Dogg and Tookie Williams. And that's Tookie Williams. He was friends. Tookie Williams spent a lot of time on Muscle Beach with Arnold Schwarzenegger. Now, that's kind of funny. I'll give you another picture here in a minute when we get to the Bloods. So in 71, the use of Crip had become common among the Avenue Cribs. That became the name for the gang. Raymond Washington and his collection of gang members influenced other area gangs, pulling these other gangs into the Crips, which is funny. Some of these included the Avalon Garden Crips, the East Side, the Inglewood, the West Side Crips. These Crip gangs were violent and constantly expanding their turf. You were either enveloped into the Crips or you became their enemies, and their enemies became collectively known as the Bloods. This fierce rivalry between the Bloods and the Crips existed throughout the 70s and the 80s. By the early 80s, the Crips were heavily involved in the drug trade. They commenced the expansion throughout the United States, and they were selling. The Crips are who brought crack into the world. Throughout the 80s and 90s, the Crips developed an intricate network of respected reputation with other countries as well. Okay, so the Crip members are initiated into the gang by committing a crime in front of other gang members. They had to commit a felony. This initiation process is known as locking in. Female members have the option to commit a crime or to become sexed in with several other older members. Crips on the East Coast wear blue and clear beads or blue and white beads around their necks, but mostly blue jeans, white shirts. They wear blue. And this is one of the reasons why in the Texas prison system, the only beads you're allowed to wear are black, because people try to get blue beads or white beads or red beads. They'll try to get other color beads to represent their gangs while they're in the prison. So the Bloods, the LA Brims, which began in 1969 on the west side of LA, was a powerful street gang, but they were not Crips. And there was no blood alliance that had been established yet. Several gangs, which eventually became part of the Blood family, already existed. And as a result of the power and the activities of the Crips, they came together. The Piru Street Boys in Compton, the Bishops, Athens Park Boys, Denver Lanes were all um, the foundation of the Blood Nation, or the Blood Gang, not the Blood Nation. The United Blood Nation is a prison gang. The Piru Street Boys, actually hung out with the Crips prior to 1972. They were friendly groups together. But for a short time, they were known as the Piru Street Crips. They also wore traditional blue rags, part of their attire. And then there's my picture of Arnold Schwarzenegger flinging the blood symbol. I think that was an early AI, because those arms aren't big enough to be Arnold Schwarzenegger. So the Piru Street Boys, as a way to combat Crip intimidation, formed their own alliance to counter the Crips, to fight against the Crips. At the time, the color of bandanas was not important, but since the Crips were known to wear blue, the Pirus and other groups decided to discontinue the wearing of blue, and they moved to red. Apparently, red is the opposite color of blue on the color wheel. So, and because of the red bandanas and the color of the red clothing, they became known as the Bloods, because blood is also red. The Piru Brims, Athens Parks, the Pueblos, they decided to unite with the Bloods and other groups. They'd been threatened or attacked by Crips. They joined the Bloods. Okay, so the Blood Nation, or the Bloods Go International, the United Blood Nation, simply called the Bloods, formed in 1993 in Rikers Island. Okay, they were a prison gang that can now be found across the world. Prior to this time, the Latin Kings were the most prevalent and organized gang in New York City. The Latin Kings, mostly Hispanic members, were targeting African Americans with violence inside the prison at Rikers Island. So the African Americans joined together to combat the Latin Kings, and they're now part of, they created the United Blood Nation, emulating the success of the Bloods from California. Okay, so the original sets were the Madstone Villains, the Valentine Bloods, and once the United Blood Nation hit the streets of New Jersey, the gangs, the Bloodstone Villains, the Sex, Money, and Murder, these all became part of the Blood Nation and part of the Bloods. The Bloods refer to each other as dogs or dog. They use a burned upside down triangle shape, looks like a dog paw on their upper arm. The three circular burns are usually from a cigarette, can be found on every member of a Blood. Some of the Bloods will have tattoos of a dog, usually a bulldog, like the Mack Truck logo. Bloods will also use the acronym Member of Bloods, or Money Over Bitches, to identify themselves. So the non-traditional gangs, these are non-traditional. They've developed not out of turf, but they're not turf oriented, but yet they still pose a threat to law enforcement personnel. They focus on drugs. Okay, the Stoners, as a group, set themselves. Everyone, and they tend to be multiracial in the areas where they're racially mixed. They dress in red or dark black clothing, preferring athletic jersey tops, metal music, and so on and so forth. The Chicano gangs are considered traditional with close ties to the family and the Chicano identity. But the cholos, the stoner lifestyle of the chonos, make them non-traditional gangs. So each of the different gang subcultures have their own type of music that they listen to, and that they enjoy. A lot of the non-traditional gangs have also found themselves mixed with the occult, but they're named for the rolling the county in approximately in the last decade. They were no more known for their drug use and getting stoned. They hung out together for the psychedelic trips that they could go on. Um, East Coast Hispanic gangs, also known as the Latin Kings, um, were formed in Chicago, and then they moved to New York. The emergence of the Sureños and the Norteños out of California, two other alliances were formed. Uh, the Folk Nation, formerly from the Illinois prison system. The formation was an attempt to bring all the Chicago street gangs under one umbrella. The attempt failed. As a result, the People Nation was formed. A lot of the gangs align or claim allegiance to one of these two, and this isn't any different. No, this isn't any different with the Hispanic gangs. I'm going to post this. I'm going to post this up because um, so that you can follow along if you wanted to. So this week in our this over here. So this week, what we have to do, you've got your lesson plan, you've got your PowerPoint from the textbook. You've got I'll post my PowerPoint up, the web links. You've got the quiz, and this week's discussion is what are the some unobtrusive signals surveillance team members can use to cover situations. Uh, when, again, this question is also including the drugs. So, what are some unobtrusive signals or surveillance team members can use to uncover such situations as when a drug buy has been completed, when help is needed, and so on? Um, we'll see you in the forums. Um,